Thank you for being flexible, and very much thank you to SimSpace for providing this space for us. We get bigger than this, we can move into the bigger room, but they have an air vent there that's very, very loud. So we came in here and we're cozy and we're happy. There is a red and an IPA here and a couple glasses if you'd like something. And that's all the announcements I have beforehand. Take it away, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. My name is Sarah Swanson, as Marky just said. And we're going to talk about software quality and trying to improve that, regardless of where you are in your career. So I was mentioning earlier, I know some people in here are students. I know some people who are full-time software developers, an instructor. And so I'm going to try to cover some things that might be of interest to everyone. So I like to call this manual, automated, and the other 31 flavors of software testing. What they are, who should do them, and how I think you can do them right. So if this is a picture of all the different kinds of tests you've heard about, you can roughly divide them between manual and automated. And then you have everything else. You have exploratory tests, usability tests, alpha and beta, smoke tests, regression tests, integration test, accessibility tests, end-to-end test, unit tests down there, and we'll get to all of these actually. You also might have heard of black box testing and white box testing, and we'll get through those. But this is kind of roughly how you might put those in different categories. And some of them can be either white or black box testing, but I swear this will make a little more sense in a minute. But before we get there, I want to introduce you to a term I like. It's semantic satiation. I've been practicing this term for a week. I still can't quite say it right. But it's when you say a word so many times, it loses all meaning. So test and testing are both going to hit maximum semantic saturation. That's why I put the other one on the bottom. So how did I get here? So I've been a software tester for probably a little over 6 years, 6 more literally. Before that though, I was a 911 dispatcher and I worked in police records. And it might seem like a weird thing to get here from there, but it all started when they wanted to replace their about 10-year-old computer automated dispatch system. And so I had a first-hand seat in a really expensive software purchase program, and it was $300,000-$400,000. It was a huge investment, and it went disastrously wrong. You know, they didn't understand who worked for them. They didn't understand what they needed. And I was just mystified that you could spend that much money and be so unhappy with what you got. So after that, and after moving to New Mexico, I started thinking about what testing meant, how people could get happier with their very expensive software purchases. I spent a lot of time in different IT areas. I've done everything from fixing computers to help desk, and now I am a QA lead. So I've had to do a lot of research. I don't really know anyone else who's a full-time professional QA. So this presentation is basically going to cover what I understand about QA and in terms that I put things in, which are generally really silly. So with that, why should you care about QA? And that's a good question. The standard response would be that it's best practices. And that's true. When things stop working at some point, and they will stop working at some point, someone might rage tweet your CEO, and that's going to come down to your boss, and that's going to come on your head. So, but you know, all of software developers are busy, and they don't have enough time. So best practices isn't really what this is about. So let's just get rid of that. So what we're going to talk about is realistic practices for busy developers. We're also going to talk about testing for people who are looking to start a career in software development. And when entry-level jobs require years of experience, testing is a real legitimate option. A lot of people, a lot of companies see testing as entry-level, like sub-junior development. And while I don't personally see it like that, it's a true story. So I'm going to hopefully give you some more information if that's the direction you're headed. And this is my passion, so I like talking about it. So thanks for listening.
Can I quickly interject? One of the reasons you want to get into QA is it's a very sought-after position. I sent Sarah 2 positions this week that I found. One for my company, one for a completely different company. People care about QA testing now, so it's definitely something you want to think about if you're looking towards what you want to do in life.
And that's very true. I mean, there are high competition for even entry-level jobs. And if you have experience testing, and even more, if you like doing it, you'll get snapped up, because those big companies take testing and automated testing really seriously. So, where should you start? Before I say anything, for the love of God, please use versioning. I really like semantic versioning, and if you get that started with your applications, it will make your life so much easier. So that's my plea.
You need to define semantic versioning?
Yeah, semantic versioning is a way of, and everybody has seen this, like if anyone uses Mac, you see, the OS 10 or 10.0 point whatever. And so it's basically a way of tracking major and minor releases in your software. Your major releases are the ones that you're telling your users it might break compatibility. So these minor releases like 1.2.1, 1.3.1, so on, those are kind of considered more minor releases. And then the major releases are 2.0.1 or so on. So if you go to the App Store, you can see a lot of the applications, they track those releases, and it's really good practice to get in that habit, because eventually, your users could say, oh, that bug I reported was finally fixed in this version. So it's pretty awesome to be able to see that, and especially, I know Julie's interested in mobile apps, so that's something that you might want to think about. But good question. So I'm also going to go over some of these terms you hear. And these are people terms. So you hear testing, you hear quality assurance, quality control, test engineering. So I'm going to kind of break those down for you and what kind of people can do those roles and what you might expect from one of those people. And as we go through, you're kind of hopefully going to see that anyone can test an application, but it requires a team commitment to really dedicate to QA. So what is testing? It's the one that's easiest to identify. Anyone can do it. You can do it, I can do it, your grandma can do it, your users do it every day and don't realize it. And one of the things you might hear is it's working as intended. And it's really fun to say. It's really fun to tell people, but it's one of those things that's an app killer. If you get into that habit over time, people will leave your application and find something better, because there's always someone willing to do it better, whether it's in terms of function or in terms of, your company's kind of filled with jerks. I mean, sorry, Uber, you've been using Lyft for a while now, but yeah, bad usability kills applications. I mean, you can try to do some kind of research on where MySpace went, but part of it's probably bad usability. It was too complicated, and your grandma just doesn't have time for, the auto-playing music and dotted borders, and so now people use Facebook. And ignoring your users' preferences and their feedback they're giving you when you're saying, oh, it's working as intended, that's a clue. And one of the things I consider makes someone a senior level developer is saying, that's not what we were trying to do with that, but maybe we can make that thing better. So find a friendly guinea pig, someone you work with, someone you love, someone who cares about you, and test them early or test with them early and often. So what's QA? I would say quality assurance is a process. It includes planning things even before development even starts. And the important part, you have to write them down. So you define and plan aspects such as test strategy. What's going to be tested? What are we doing? What is this app doing? Support decisions. Are you going to support Windows, Mac OS? Are you going to support Windows 7? Are you going to support Internet Explorer?
No.
Well, that's worth saying. I mean, you can point back to it and be like, I'm sorry you reported this bug, but we're not really supporting that browser. And that's fair. So your test plan, which is basically the who, what, where, why, how sort of thing. Test cases, how you're going to generate data, if you're going to mock up data, what the story is, what your user stories are, who's who. So that's kind of your test cases, your test data. And with test data, I would include planning for analytics, because that is going to be your BFF. Because if you find out 60% of your users are using Internet Explorer, you should probably adjust your support decisions. But if they're not, you're wasting money. So I would say that's a big part of test data. And also, is it confidential? Are you going to be storing protected health information, credit card information? Like, those are things you have to consider. Are you going to have storage? Like, how long are you going to store it? Like, what happens when you max out a server? Because that'll happen too. And then your test environment, which is kind of my baby. There's a saying, everybody has a test environment, just some people are lucky enough to have a production environment. So planning for how you're going to test things is pretty important. And then the best time to plan is, of course, before development. The second next best time is as soon as you decide that you should have some planning involved. All right, so quality control is a little bit different because a lot of people kind of get testing and quality control mixed up, and it's just kind of glossed over. And so my opinion of quality control is verifying someone got what they asked for. And where testing is an objective decision, it's sort of like pass-fail. Like, this worked, this didn't work. Quality control is a subjective judgment, and it requires someone to understand what your goal is. It requires someone to understand your customers. It requires someone to have an appreciation for where you want to be, and have an appreciation for what your team considers quality. So I'm going to show you how I would call quality control as opposed to pass-fail. And this is great, you can't read any of it, but where you see these green checkboxes, this passed, this failed, but these orange things right here things aren't quite right. And in this case, I said, hey, product owner, this ain't right. What do you want to do? And in all of these cases, he was like, no biggie.
I'm sorry, since it's kind of difficult to see, can you just tell me roughly what the ratio is between the green and the
Looks
orange?
like we have
Just roughly.
25% green, 10% red, and the rest are orange. So that's a lot of subjective judgment. And how you do this will depend on your team. Like, I can get away with this because ain't nobody else got time for that. Like, not a big deal. And I have gotten to the point with some of my teams that I can say, okay, so this thing is written the way you want it, but that it has such problems that I'm calling it a bug. Because there's a difference between poor usability and a bug, and sometimes it's just straight a bug.
So, quick question on that. Say you're testing something and there are very specific test instructions, and you see something that would be orange, that is, okay, this is not in the parameters. Would you say this is a stopper of this ticket, or would you create a new ticket on that?
So that is also very based on the team. Originally, it depended on how bad it was, but if it actually crossed the line into a bug, I would leave it as is, demo it as is, and create a new bug based on that so it didn't stop progression. If it was a bad enough bug that I thought it going to production was going to cause problems, I'd stop the whole kind of story here. So it just really depends. Sometimes things are showstoppers, and that is incredibly subjective. And it will also depend on what your industry is. For me, I worked in healthcare, medicine, so there were a couple of bugs, including patient recommendations that were getting uploaded to the wrong patients. I was like, but that got caught before it went to production. So that's a showstopper if I've ever heard of one.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, there are definite important reasons, and that's an industry that the hospital should, or hospitals and things like that should really get testing. All right, so we talked about testers, we talked about people who are doing QA and QC, and we'll talk about test engineers. And these have a lot of different names, a lot of different job titles. They mean slightly different things, but you will hear QA automation engineer, software test engineer, and the mouthful, software development engineer and test. Those are all hard to say, so I'm just going to call them test engineers for this presentation. But basically, it's a programmer that focuses on automation and improving application quality. And at higher levels, they kind of get into even like a DevOps environment where they're doing so many different kinds of testing that they really have a lot of say in when things go to production, kind of like what we were talking about. In smaller teams, they're kind of blended roles, but I mean, at high levels, they have a lot of power and they get paid a lot of money. So it's a good way to go. And then it's like, yeah, QA's hard. There's a lot of stuff in there, a lot of people doing different things. It's like, I got feedback that this color of blue is ugly. And it's like, well, can they read it? You know, so it's like getting different kinds of feedback and sifting through it is difficult. And for that reason, you really have to have your entire team dedicated to it. From testers, developers, project managers, leadership, the people paying the money, it's gotta be everyone all on board. And for that reason, I don't think every team should have a dedicated QA. It's just an exercise in frustration for the entire team if the entire team's not on board with it. You have someone saying, stop, I see danger, and other people are like, whatever. No one's gonna have that problem. And so for that reason, you kind of need to have an agreement with a team of, you know, kind of trusting each other's boundaries and having those moments where if someone's like, I will die on this mountain, trusting that. So for that reason, I think a lot of people should consider having contractors, maybe a mix of like testers to manually test your application, QA people to help you establish a plan, help you do that QC process of saying, oh, this is a little weird. But it doesn't have to be a tester. There are a lot of people, or a QA. It's just so long as someone's taking that role. So, yep, contracting is an option for some people. And it also depends on where you find them. Like a lot of people outsource testing, and I personally think that's fine as long as you're not expecting those qualitative outcomes from them. And maybe you can do that too, but I think it's on a case-by-case basis. So for the rest of the presentation, I'm kind of going to use this shorthand. Testers, your grandma, your cousin, anyone who can help you kind of sanity check what you're working on. QAs, someone who's doing testing, QA, QC, but probably not coding. There's a limited amount they can do that approaches that, but I will call a test engineer anyone who's actually doing programming or writing, scripting, writing sort of automated tests. Okay, so we'll get into what is automated testing. And it's a huge subset of different things done different ways. You use tools, scripts, and or software to test outcomes, see if things are working, see if you broke something. And developers and test engineers, and in a limited way, QA, do these kinds of tasks. And manual testing. That one's pretty easy too. Everybody does it, not everyone's good at it. And if automated testing is using stuff to test other stuff, then manual testing is doing it your own damn self. So if you're thinking about automated testing like your house, you could buy a dog and train it to go to the fridge and get you a beer and bring it back, and it's like awesome. But there's a lot of work involved in that. What if you got the wrong dog? What if they don't like those treats? And so, you know, there's a lot of work that goes into doing something in an automatic way. And then the pro is, you know, if the fridge door won't open, your dog would come back and tell you, which no dog would actually do, but it can fail. It can take a lot of time, but if you're going to be getting up and getting a beer every 5 minutes, first, you know, I'm worried about you. And second, yeah, having an automated process for that would help a lot. So in busy software development teams, automated testing is awesome. So a good way to kind of get closer to this is doing a code review. You don't have to have a QA for that. It's just kind of like someone else giving a once-over like, wow, I see this glaring mistake or this glaring problem. Let's try to figure this out. But it's so important to have someone else do that because they kind of go into it with like this naive state where they're like, I kind of know what's going on. I kind of, don't know what you're doing, but it's a good practice. And then, unfortunately, no amount of automated testing will completely negate the need for at least some manual testing. That's the sad truth. So next we'll get into something you might have heard of. It's like white and black box testing. And this is, again, kind of another category of testing. Some things fall into one, some things fall into the other, some can be done both ways. But generally, white box means automated testing. And it requires someone to be able to see inside the code for what's going on. So there's this guy in this sweet, invisible car, and if you could see, it was like, oh man, that transmission, I'm a little worried. That would be kind of what white box testing would be like. And then black box testing is someone on the outside kind of looking in and saying, what's going on here? They don't really have concerns about how something's working, they're just like interacting with it. So black box testing can be performed by anyone, your grandma, your cousin. Again, it's going to take the right kind of person to be able to do that because there's some reporting aspects to it. But you can do this both manual, well, mostly manual, but these are a few of the different kinds of testing we're going to talk about in relation to this. There's still some automated things you can do with this. And white box testing is, again, being able to see inside how something's working. Performed by devs, QAs, in a limited degree, and test engineers. So again, there's ways you can manually test things and automated ways you can test things. And again, these are really general categories, so you can make arguments for a lot of these going one way or the other. But since I'm the one with the laptop, we're doing this my way. So we're going to talk about different kinds of software development strategies, and we're going to start with waterfall because I have a little bit of experience with waterfall, mostly in that agile is really hard, and I've witnessed the process falling apart completely, and then everyone takes a little bit of a siesta, and then eventually someone finds the defibrillator paddles to like try to get it started again. But basically, by the time a waterfall project gets to testing, if the queue ain't there, it's not gonna be. So it's mostly about functional testing, finding bugs, and quality control. So QA in Agile web development. It's like, it gets a lot better at this point because it's like you're not waiting months and things get to you before it's like, this is an utter catastrophe. So QA does a lot in contributing to sprint planning. So I don't know if you're all familiar with that, but software development cycles, they're like 2 weeks and you plan at the head of it what you want to get done. And then that way you're kind of making small chunks of progress towards an eventual release, or you're adding things to a product that's already out there. So QA can help a lot with that. You have something you want to get done, and the QA can say, hey, this is a liability. How would we test this? Like, what are we trying to establish? Developers naturally think of like, oh, a feature. How am I going to make that work? A tester, how am I going to break that? It's kind of like this yin and yang.
My favorite QA tester in the world said to me, if you didn't want it broke, you wouldn't have brought it to me.
After my own heart. It's like, I broke it, are you happy about it? Yeah, I think about how people will misuse something, because I came from a help desk. I've seen things, I've seen some things. So, yeah. So yeah, and also a QA kind of gets familiar with the problems that you've been dealing with for a while, and they kind of understand how your team works, so they can kind of nudge things in the right direction. And they can champion resolving bugs as opposed to your boss who just wants new features all the time. So it's kind of like a balance you can strike there. And again, if someone's not doing it, you're in trouble. As long as anyone's doing it, it's helpful. So, and then you're mid-sprint and reality sets in and you're screwed. Like, you've so far overshot everything and you're like, you don't want to make your boss mad. And it's like, if you have a QA, if you have someone who has that mindset, they're going to be like, let's cut it right down to the bone. Let's make sure the core functionality is there. And that's super valuable. It's like, I've had that experience where the solution, so I found a really bad bug, and my solution to that bug, which couldn't be fixed in time, was break it more. And the developer's like, what? Is this a trap? And I said, no, I mean, it's failing silently, break it more. Like, make sure that someone knows it's broken, rather than just like releasing it into the wild and it failing and nobody knowing. And, that's pretty much a really bad time. So, functionality, it's important. So, I'm going to split all these different kind of testing into kind of early development, mid-cycle development, late cycle, and then like post. So in the early development, we're kind of going to talk about these kinds of testing. Sanity checking, which some people call sanity testing. Unit testing, smoke testing. And then mid-cycle, we're going to talk about these: integration, usability and accessibility, exploratory testing, and end-to-end testing. In late development, we're going to go over kind of a smorgasbord. That's a Wi-Fi password, by the way, if anyone needs it. We're going to talk about performance, load, stress, security, vulnerability testing, acceptance testing. And then we're going to talk about regression testing last. So onwards to smoke testing, which is basically, when you turned it on, did smoke come out? So what that really means is, you try to function and it did or didn't work. And I encourage people to test locally on their own computer when they're writing their code, but test it again when you push it to your first development server where everything else is, because it's great if it works on your computer and not so great if it doesn't work anywhere else, unless you want your grandma coming over and using your computer to log into Facebook. So.
Plus one for setting a Toshiba on fire.
Hey, they didn't want me to set it. If they didn't want me to set it on fire, they shouldn't have given it to me.
Nicely done.
So, unit testing. This one's pretty squarely on the shoulders of developers. So, hopefully everybody has heard of it. And they're the smallest, kind of teeny tiny tests to see, does it work, does it not work? There are a vast number of tools you can use. This blog post, mo.github.io, JavaScript unit testing tools, has some really cool feedback on a bunch of the really frequently used kinds of unit testing tools. And for my own convenience, I'm going to lump API testing into unit testing, because I think it's easiest done when you're neck deep in it. But what I will say for that is, along with API functionality tests, you should consider making sure you're reliably getting responses, load testing to see if it can handle a lot of calls simultaneously, and whether you need to consider a rate limit. So mid-cycle testing. Again, we're talking about usability and accessibility, exploratory testing, integration, I skipped that one, and end-to-end testing. So my recommendation for a test environment is off your local machine on a test server. And this is the stuff that's going on while a feature is in development, kind of getting close to completion, but while it's still up in the air. So integration testing manual style. So if a feature is complete and it passed a smoke test, you interact with it to make sure your new shiny didn't break something more important. Because, that happens. And it's a bummer. So, and this also is for bugs that have been fixed and are pushed, need to be validated to make sure that they really did fix the problem. So, and why is integration testing important? Shout out to Brian Sinclair for this one. Yeah, so that's the case where the hand towel dispenser's working, or the hand dryer's working, but just how it actually worked out didn't quite work out. And this is how, you can have unit tests, but someone really this would be an orange for me, and I would be strongly leaning red, but at this point it's kind of all established, so I'd blame that one, I'd put that one on the product owner's shoulders. I'm like, this ain't working great, but up to you, champ. You're the one with the money. We did it how you asked. So, auto testing integration. So who does it? Developers or test engineers. And after manual testing, seems like nothing broke. Yay! So then you write some new integration tests for the new thing. And for this one, there's going to be a lot of overlap with regression testing, so I'll get to how I break those down later. But for the short term, you're kind of trying to make sure your new stuff didn't break your old stuff. And there's also something called incremental integration testing, which is tests run on each branch before a merge to master. So and this can be paired with manual QA, where your QA actually checks the branch out, tests it, and kind of gives you feedback on it, but this is before it's going any further than it already has. So why you might want to do incremental integration testing, or an example of a company that does, says, you can branch if you want to, you can leave your test behind, but if you don't test, then we won't test, and we'll leave your merge behind. So,
Can we do the unit test dance?
I don't know the unit testing.
Well, no, the song that.
Oh, I don't know that one, I'm sorry.
No, it's
various
not
on
the
the
safety
same,
dance.
but it is the safety.
I know the
dance.
tune.
It's a form of safety.
Yeah, it's not the safety dance.
Oh, okay. All right, so usability testing. Again, I think you should develop an early testing strategy based on your specific team. And this is in essence alpha testing. So in that fluid state, you can still make adjustments before they're set in stone. So this really depends on what kind of person is paying you. Your product owner, your team leader, whoever, your customer. And I would really encourage you to try to find a functional way to test your stuff beforehand in the ways that's going to make them really mad, or not make them really mad. So if someone's visual oriented, you might have like a high quality mock-up for them that really shows, visually the interactions. But if they're technical, an interactive click-through wireframe would be great. So they can say, oh, there's a step missing, or I don't like this, or this is confusing. Before you've actually finished and polished and tested, it'll save you a lot of time. So in terms of later usability testing, these are my recommendations. 1, look it up on a super crappy monitor, because I'll tell you, gray on white, you won't see a thing. And 2, have someone from another generation look at it. And this, I mean completely genuinely, because if your team is filled with more mature, older software developers, they might not know the new hotness, and vice versa. If you have like a bunch of college grads, they might make every font so small nobody can see it. I mean, there's a lot of value in testing with different kinds of people. So here's another, this one's a little bit harder to see. Or maybe it won't play at all. Oh, okay. These are 2 wonderful windows that were installed so you can't actually open them. 2 functional windows where nothing actually works. So I can definitely empathize with the feeling of, I gave you what you wanted, why are you mad about it? And, I've done it myself. I've been like super clear with my criteria and really laid it out nice, and I'm like, I did it good. And then it comes back and it's like, I am the worst. So ultimately though, as a QA, I'm trying to make sure it's quality, whether or not I was the fault there. But yeah, it's up to your team to kind of determine what you're wanting. And for the things you find when you fix them, like if you've really strict agile practices, like more power to you, next test cycle or whatever. But for some people, it's like, we didn't test early enough, we didn't get enough good feedback, and now we have to delay a push to production or a new version till you get it right. So I also want to talk about accessibility testing, and that's that your app works for people with disabilities. So it is law in the United States, and you might be liable for it, but nobody might find it. It doesn't mean that you can just ignore these issues, especially since your app might be used in countries that do have serious laws about that, like the EU's coming forward with Privacy Shield and a whole bunch of stuff that your company is going to be liable for if someone in Europe can get to it. So there are lots of tools to check accessibility. I've used Wave before, but there are just endless numbers of them to help you do this without a whole lot of effort on your part. And let's see, yeah, the one thing I know someone specifically who has complete lack of sight, and she said, for the love of God, use your HTML tags responsibly, because that's how someone with no vision can navigate their screen with a screen reader. So that was her plea to me, and I'm doing my part to pass it forward. So exploratory testing. It's one of two kinds of manual testing people think about when you talk about manual testing. And I think it's pretty important to focus manual tests, especially for busy software developers, on kind of a limited scope. So test anything new and anything that's important to your boss, law enforcement, and active Twitter users. So anything that's going to get your job in trouble, your company in trouble, or the big boss really angry. So really, the big key is don't break anything that's more important when you're working on something. And end-to-end testing. This simulates browser behavior. So depending on how you do it, you might actually visually see a browser come up and run through a series of tests, which is awesome or creepy depending on how you think of it. But it's kind of the other kind of manual testing people think of. And if you can think of like a long, boring test script and you do this and that and this and that, and you kind of want to zone out, that's the kind of testing people are thinking about. They're like, oh, I have to hit this button 5 times now. But this is a great one to automate for that reason. But really, end-to-end testing is kind of dropping out of favor because these are like big, heavy tests a lot of times. And they are super time consuming, especially since if you're testing just, going through that whole list, you are going to have to do it multiple times if you're using different browsers, different operating systems. Like you might be doing this same test script 5 times. So that's pretty crazy. So testers do it manually. Devs, QA, test engineers do it automated. So automated end-to-end testing, there are just like tons of tools to do this. One of the ones that I've used, and a pretty popular one, is Selenium. And I know you can't read any of this, but it doesn't matter. You write all of these test scripts, and this is how QA and people who aren't coders can help you. You can get an add-on for your browser that will record what you're clicking, and that doesn't always work. It unfortunately doesn't work well with Angular in particular, but they can kind of do that, and then those can be passed on to someone else to do the coding parts of it. But it does pretty easily identify things that people might struggle with if you can't reproduce a test. Let's see. And also, if you use Selenium in particular, you can do parallel testing. So instead of you going through, okay, this is my test script on Internet Explorer and Windows 7, and then Mac OS and Safari and all of that, you can pay someone else to do it for you on their own computers. So Sauce Labs and Browser Stack companies like that will run just endless combinations on their computers, and they can do mobile testing, and it's just like, you do your thing and I will get on with the rest of my job. So some of the things I consider late development testing are all of these. And at this point, you should have your testing running on something that is as close to production as you humanly can get it, because there's really little value in your testing in a completely different environment. It's like, great, it works on these things that aren't remotely what the users would use, like an in-house server as opposed to like a cloud server that your production's on. It's cheaper, but you're losing a ton of the value. And you might as well not do some of these if you're going to have that kind of a test environment. So we'll talk a little bit about performance, load, and stress testing. What I call performance testing is client-side app performance on an average computer. Load testing, what happens when a bunch of people use your app at once? And then stress testing, what happens when your site hits the front page of Reddit? And it can be ugly. So if you want to do performance testing, step 1, collect analytics. Step 2, be horrified. Because I mean, going back to it's like someone's using a compact Presario, using Windows 7 and IE 11, and you're like, F my life. But, the truth is, corporations have endless amounts of money, and they will throw it at software, and just like, in the face, buy stuff. And their users, or their employees are using, 10-year-old hardware with 4 gigs of RAM, and it's just like, they don't like it, and they don't like you, because your software requires stuff they don't have. So, yeah, keep that in mind. Restrain yourself. And so this is how I do my quick and dirty manual performance testing. Speaking of terrible hardware, I usually spin up virtual machines of various operating systems that I predefine I will support. Sorry, old Mac OS, not happening. I allocate 2 CPU cores, 4 gigs of RAM, and throttle network conditions just for fun. I mean, not just for fun. Like, you get used to having 100K at work or whatever, and then you go to Starbucks and it's like, wow, I had no idea my site loaded like that, and I'm a little ashamed of myself.
I want to call bullshit, and you just wanted a coffee at that point.
I prefer satellite coffee, actually.
If you want coffee, you don't go to Starbucks.
I go to satellite for that. What did you say, Brian?
Have you heard about what Facebook does on Tuesdays? They throttle their campus networks down to mobile speeds.
Nice. That must be painful, but
And that's
no, I
what
totally
did.
approve.
It's very much done to help people understand.
Yeah.
And we talked about like, oh, how terrible this is. It's like, well, that's India. That's
Exactly.
China. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
there's huge networks where
If you want to
speed
have
is slow and costly.
oh yeah,
Like, how much does your web page cost to load in
Yeah.
Brazil?
and not just that, web statistics on the internet. I looked up a real site for this. It says 47% of users expect your site to load within 2 seconds, and then 40% will abandon it after 3 if it doesn't load. And when I was on like a high quality fiber network, one of the apps I was testing took 58 seconds to load and was downloading more than 10 megs, like 12. I was like, what? Yeah. Really, what? It's like, come on, people, what's going on? So basically, there are automated performance testing tools for both server and client-side performance. So there are websites you can use to say, oh, it took way too effing long to download your page, and all of these graphics and all of this stuff was taking way too long. So, load testing. Again, analytics help you estimate average use. You should also think about managing normal peak usage, especially if you're making stuff for a company where all the employees are in at 7 o'clock in the morning, all of them hitting your authentication server at the same time. It's gonna take them a long time to get in if you didn't plan for that. And then it also is a helpful baseline for establishing when something just ain't right. Everyone trying to log on at 2 a.m. from China? I don't think so. And then also, if you're using any third-party APIs, better make sure you didn't exceed your rate limits, because that might get pricey or broken.
Yeah. The 5030 broken.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh my God.
So, and that kind of leads into stress testing, determining the limits of your application.
Just for comedy, one of the student projects we had a kind of a trial free tier of an API, and the unit test alone exceeded the entire monthly limit.
That doesn't shock me at all. Mail sending providers,
Yeah.
check that,
Yeah.
because when you get on their naughty list, they don't like you anymore.
And I figured, you know what it was? We used a composer package which did big O of n squared calls to the API.
Uh-oh.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
That's why.
Google Maps has a very
Yes,
limited API
yes.
as well.
Yeah, we
And
use
if you
we use something
exceed
like that for
If you
locations.
exceed that, because every time someone loads your page, they're actually pinging Google Maps
Yeah.
to load the map, as opposed to you caching that.
And that's exactly
long,
why
long.
you want it on a production, a very similar to production environment. I personally demand for my, when I can make demands for my QA server, I use a copy of the live database because I want that data in all of its disgusting legacy glory and the volume of it. So it's, it's unfortunate because I lose all of my test work every single time I get a new copy, but that's exactly what I want because I don't want my test failures to be giving me false positives. So I do that every time I start testing a new version. So what's stress testing? It's basically knowing at what point your shit breaks, and how it breaks, in what order. And then you have to figure out, okay, well, it's all broken, what then? So it gives you an opportunity to test your recovery strategy, and God help you if you don't have one. And you don't have a recovery strategy if you haven't tested it. Ask Delta, and American, and United. So it's also making sure you can defend against distributed denial of service attacks.
That's good.
So security and vulnerability testing. This is similar to stress testing, obviously, but honestly, this isn't my jam. I don't pretend to be an expert on this, but I'm guessing for the most of us, it's not yours either. So my favorite words in this circumstance, plausible deniability. Be able to blame someone else. And really have someone who knows what they're doing take a look at it. And even if it is your expertise, it's impossible to evaluate your own work. Testing your own code is like investigating a homicide, but you are the murderer.
Yeah.
So yeah, lots of companies end up named and shamed for compromising their users' details. Don't be that person, entity, company. And then acceptance testing. That picture I showed you earlier with all of the failures all over it, that's kind of my idea of acceptance testing. Validating what was and wasn't delivered, what did and didn't meet requirements. And it's one of the final stages of the development cycle. The product owner, customer, whoever says, yep, this is what I asked for, and hopefully you involve them early enough that that's an easy process, because if not, it gets messy and expensive for everybody. Let's see. So you can kind of call this beta testing. That's kind of, again, kind of like a waterfall-y idea. But if earlier usability testing and all of that was alpha, you can kind of call this beta. And again, before involving your customer, have someone else, anyone else, take a look at it, because it'll save your face, it'll save your company's face, and it's just a good practice. Maybe they'll be really impressed and give you a popsicle or something. So one of the ways I like to kick off acceptance testing is just doing a live demo for your users. And if there is something they might want to spend money on improving or doing, if you have ideas, perfect time to talk about it. They're jazzed and they're like, that's so cool, yes, I'll give you so much more money. So I really am a big fan of user demos of new features. So again, this is the kind of thing that I've gone through with people and yeah, these orange ones, let me show you how this is doing it. And you tell me if you're okay with it, because I think it's a little funky. But so I'm putting regression testing in the post-development kind of stage. And what test environment you can use kind of depends on how careful you've been up to that point. It's like some companies run these on production twice a day just to make sure nothing old's broken.
We exercise roughly 80% of everything you can do with DigitalOcean every 10 minutes.
Holy crap! So there you go. You definitely don't want to do that manually.
We don't have actual QA people, but we have a developer maintained end-to-end regression style testing that runs every 10 minutes on production. It creates a virtual server, creates spaces, allocates a disk, puts some files in it.
That's so cool.
Tests login, creates anything that makes us money pretty much.
I like it.
And even using public CMSs like WordPress, Drupal, anything, if you don't have a regression test when they switch versions or even contributed modules, you can update something and then all of a sudden the most key feature breaks.
Yeah.
Because they changed a
Something minor, something you had no idea had to
If
do
you
with
don't
it.
have that documented and figured out, you're going to be hurting.
Yes, very much so. So if you've been sloppy up to this point, sorry you can't do it on production without like really risking stuff. Or if you have multiple production servers, maybe you can spare a couple or whatever. But yeah, regression testing. And I kind of call these tests like, did you break anything that already exists? So if this is also, so integration testing, regression testing, and end-to-end testing kind of get all nebulous and mixed up. Sometimes things start as integration tests or they become regression tests. Kind of depends on what kind of company you have, software as a service or something like that, you know. It kind of depends. So let's see. Who does it? Developers or software test engineers? And like I said, it can really get confused with integration testing, but basically it tests that established functions still work. And it can definitely reveal version control problems, kind of like what Marky was talking about. Someone changed something and it shouldn't have affected anything else, but it did. And also bugs that have regressed. So if you have multiple people pushing to branches and nobody's like checking things out or whatever, and you don't have continuous integration tests, like the actual branches being tested before they're merged, you can get all sorts of version control problems. He's not here this week, but Ian, a lot of his time is spent like combing through all of these updates and figuring out which ones are supposed to go on, because they're just happening so often and from so many different people, it gets crazy.
And if you're not, as a developer, if you're not doing regression testing, you are hurting yourself.
Yes, totally agree,
And your colleagues.
for sure.
No, just yourself. Your colleagues are laughing at you.
Until your boss is really mad at you. So, yeah, once a bug is solved, that's when you make a regression test for it to go and run with all of your other tests to make sure it doesn't rear its ugly head again in 6 weeks. Because that gets users real upset. So what I would suggest focusing your automated tests on. So the following is sourced mostly from the Google testing blog, which I love. They have a series called Testing on the Toilet, which is kind of weird, but they have really great advice on a whole bunch of different stuff. So if anyone's interested in those actual posts, I'll link it to you. But what some of their experts suggest is methods that change states and testing for the result you need, not what you expect to work. The effects, not causes. So if you're writing tests to expect results, rather than maybe if you called to order a pizza, you're not testing to make sure you called to order a pizza or a call was placed. You're testing to make sure you got your damn pizza. Or that, yeah, it was delivered. That way, if the method changes, your test might not immediately break, or, you know, it might successfully fail if, you know, someone changed the number for Pizza Hut to Jimmy John's and you call and the call was successful, but you didn't get your pizza. And it's like, how can you live a life like that? She just wanted a pizza.
Hold on. You can test somewhere besides the toilet?
That changes my home office drastically. If I do that, can I count my bathroom on my taxes if I do a reno?
Absolutely. That's office space as far as I'm concerned.
Hey, Google does it.
You don't have to test
Plausible deniability.
You don't have to test it there if you use it for the course of work.
Nice.
And if you do that, you're flush with cash.
Actually, that reminds me. I got really sick and I was watching like YouTube videos and I had the app I was testing in the background and my like CPU just was like out of control. So I did actually do testing in the bathtub at one point and I was like, oh my gosh, I finally found this bug I've been trying to find for so long. And then my boss was like, you're desperately sick, it's 11:30 p.m., can you please just go to bed? But it was a victory. So some more automated testing tips. Keep tests simple, small, and unnested to avoid flaky tests. And a flaky test is a test that passes sometimes and fails other times with no discernible cause.
Sorry, I've
So yeah. And Google says that like the bigger in size your tests are, the more likely they are to be flaky, and keeping them unnested so that the effects immediately follow after the causes. So here are some of those blog posts that these recommendations in particular came from. Two of them, yes, testing on the toilet. So again, and just like regular programming, you need to comment your code. What's being tested and why? Because that's not always clear. It's like, why are you doing this so weirdly?
Yeah, if you're inserting a regression test for a ticket, like link the ticket in a comment.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. Yeah. Hopefully you're using Jira or something like human beings. I mean, if your team's with it enough to have QA, then you probably do have something like that.
Have you seen the new Jira? Human beings aren't using it.
So these are some super general recommendations for the kinds of tests I would recommend for different kinds of organizations. So if your software as a service, you're going to potentially focus on automatic integration, security, vulnerability, load and performance testing. If you're building software for in-house employees, automated integration testing as you make it better or worse over time. Testing, usability testing, because if you have a whole bunch of grandmas, you need to get them involved in this process. Consulting or contracting companies, automated regression testing is a great thing to give to your clients so they can tell you what broke when they want to give you more money. And your integration tests can become your regression tests. Acceptance testing, I mean, that's obviously a huge one. Security and vulnerability testing, and everybody, manual integration, usability testing, and unit testing. That's super general, super generic, but if we're talking about what's real, focus on a couple of the things. You don't need all 31 flavors of testing, potentially. So I just thought I'd give some tips for people on writing a good bug report. Make sure it's reproducible. I mean, this kind of depends on your team. Some things it's like, I've seen this shadow in the corner of the app for so long, like maybe you can get help in nailing it down. But for the most time, it should be reproducible with reproduction steps. And yeah, that's a big one. And also what you expected the outcome to be. It's like, I opened the door and it hit me in the face, and maybe that's how you wanted it to be, but I didn't expect it to hit me in the face. And also, Pixar didn't happen. This is my big one. I include, depending on what kind of a bug it is, a screenshot or screen recording if it's like a multi-reproduction step thing. I include the logs, including headers, response, full response, everything that I can possibly get, because that's going to make it so much easier. And if any of you actually go into full-time testing, I recommend testing it on multiple environments. You can find out whether it's, oh, this is just a bug in Safari, or this is just a bug on Windows 8. And that can help you kind of narrow down the priority for fixing something. Like if you have very few users using Microsoft Edge, sure, delay that one. But if it's, on Mac on Chrome and all of you use Mac and Chrome, it's a little more important probably. So, also other stuff, pretty obvious, include a descriptive title, description, reproduction steps, result, expected result. And then again, what tested environment failed on, and the version number I know you'll have in your app because it means so much to me. And deadly serious about semantic versioning. I don't know how I ever lived without it, but life is so much more beautiful with it.
And more importantly, note the version you were testing against. Or
exactly. And that's where the server thing will help. I'd actually recommend on your testing servers, you have like a banner or something across the top, different colors, and very clearly say what version is on it. Because otherwise, and especially if you're taking screenshots, like, hey, that's grand. I can see right there that that's a blue line, and I can see the version number, and it makes it much easier to report stuff.
In that same vein, sometimes if you have a test environment where there's a branch up and there's not really a meaningful version number, like a commit hash from Git is really useful as well.
Yeah.
Or the branch or a tag.
Yeah. And it's,
Right.
yeah, that's a great example for if someone, like if you have a QA that has a specific branch they're testing, it's like, yeah, being able to in some way differentiate those things.
And I'm not arguing against the commit branch or the commit hash, but if you say on develop, this is happening, and I go to the server and say, well, I can just do a quick get, status and see 3 commits behind. Okay, let me update that.
That's
Is this
if
still-
you can get to the server, if you're using immutable environments. that can
Yeah,
work.
okay, good point.
So my tips for surviving manual testing without descending into chaos is 1, know your permissions. Like, what kind of user accounts do you have? What can they do? What can they not do? Simulate the user experience as closely as possible. It's great if it works on your local computer, but nobody cares. Test for what should be there and what shouldn't be there. This is hugely overlooked. Like, it's great if your super admin account can access this thing. Like, there's some value in making sure that function worked. But if your like lowest user level can access your control panel, that ain't good. So what should there be there and what shouldn't be there? This is a testing tip I picked up kind of early on, is use your Gmail account for sending yourself test emails. Because they need to go, if you're using like a mail provider like Sendinblue or something, they have a reputation system where if you send out a whole bunch of garbage emails, they're gonna kick you off. So you can put as many dots in your Gmail address as you want and they look unique, but they're not.
And actually, if you do a like plus whatever, it only looks at the whatever's on the left of the plus.
Yeah.
So you can do Sarah at Gmail or Sarah plus I am testing this bug
Oh, nice.
at gmail.com, and you will get that response as that.
And I wonder why every time I log into a public Wi-Fi, it's something at 10minutemail.com.
I don't know.
But that's that's the thing. That's why I don't use my email on public Wi-Fi. I use
Yeah.
I use my AOL address because who the fuck emails there?
That's a good
B,
point, but
I add that as well.
for testing, I wouldn't recommend sending emails to accounts you can't control, because if you use some kind of trash mailbox system, like occasionally I've used maildrop.cc, like Bob Dole at maildrop.cc. Someone else can get into there, okay? So I would recommend something you can actually control, even if it's just a trash email account. You don't want those getting out of your control.
I used to always do test at no.where, which
I bet that's a real address. You can't make those
where
guesses.
is not a valid,
Yeah.
but also I don't get to see the results.
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
useless.
What's the point of testing? It's like you send 12 emails, you should probably validate that you got 12 emails. Or else maybe Sendinblue rate limited you, which is what happened to an organization I had, and I had to wait. I had to get 5 emails an hour for like 36 hours before I could say something worked. Oh my. So the real secret to manual testing is make it funny. That's the real thing. It keeps you paying attention.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, here are some of my fake people, and all of these are me. So you have Beatrix Ampersand, Billy Bob Dole, because I love using Bob Dole, I don't know why. I have Bristol Squid Ink, and they all have background stories. Bristol Squid Ink is an artist turned doctor because she believes in humanity. We have Dr. Diva Roboto Jr., who's a DJ at night.
What does his
Barista
dad do?
Cerestra. Oh, he's also involved.
No, what
in
does
the
his
scene.
dad do?
He's just a doctor.
Okay.
We have Brunhilde Seaworthy, the sea captain. Chipotle on my food is good because I really like Chipotle. And we have Feathery Rasputin down here, which I think was beer related. So that's the real trick to it. You have to keep yourself entertained. And more than that, it's like, I'll get all cultural now. It's like we develop these stories, we read, we watch television. You kind of build this character in your head. And it is super valuable for testing. At one point I was testing a health application and I entered a fake patient and it came back. I was like, why is Bob Stroganoff listed as a woman? It's because that field got dropped and defaulted to female, and it's like, you can't do that with real patients. Like, that was an app for cancer patients.
Hey, Bob Stroganoff may have identified.
You know, I knew though, because he's in my head, okay? So that's the real point.
I had a supervisor get mad at me for unit testing a 6-pack of bulldozers.
I don't know why you get mad about that. So same application I was working on was this cancer application we developed in partnership with the Centers for Disease Control. And keep it funny, but be really careful about how funny it is, because we had a list of like patient problems for cancer patients, and I was working with this developer, so one of the problems I put was Danny's face. And I said, yes, this is an active problem. And I didn't realize the CDC was using the same test environment, so they're like, Danny's face is a problem. They thought it was hilarious. So I was really lucky that time. And Danny didn't care either. But yeah, it's still kind of a joke in the office, like, Danny's face. So that's the real true story of like how to survive manual testing. Is like, if you want to do X-Men, awesome. If you want to do, SpongeBob characters, great. It's just like, you have to keep yourself engaged is the real story.
My previous employer has a bunch of Energizer workhorns still in their database.
Whatever floats your boat. So, yeah, there is value in having a dedicated QA. Not everybody needs one. It's good to have someone who's kind of the advocate for function over shiny, function over new, kind of remembering the things, the challenges you had. But it's really up to the individual team, kind of what kind of person you need and when you need them. So, and if you have one, here's some suggestions for how to keep your QA sane. It's like, be clear on your preferences. If you're cool with if you want to hear things that I've seen forever but haven't been able to reproduce, I don't care, I'll tell you. So it's like, it's a collaboration. One of the parts of that is, I consider bug resolutions negotiable. Like, that's a me thing, that's a team thing. It's like, if someone wants to say, I can't do the thing you want me to, let's duke it out. And I'd be like, yes, that's fun. Negotiation. So you can't mark it unable to reproduce unless you try to reproduce it. Usability issues sometimes are significant enough to be a bug. Negotiate with your QA. Be patient with curiosity. For my brethren, I apologize in advance if they say something is corrupt, because really they mean shit's broken, I don't know why. So, that's the end!
Well, actually, if I can add to that, because as a developer, write valid QA tests is going to keep your QA, and I say this because my QA people complained incessantly because I said, go here and it should look right. And then we made, it a standard where you say, as a type of user,
yes,
go to this place, do this one thing, and you should see this. And if you don't have those 4 things in there, because if you miss the first thing and just say non-admin person could possibly not even get to the URL that you're trying to do. So if you don't have that portion in there, you want to be very, very specific as to the who, what, where, when.
It depends.
Who, what, when, what.
Depends on testing. I love chasing down weird bugs.
Where, what.
Who, what, where, why, how.
Who, what, where. Because, or who, what. Anyway,
Where.
you know what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Anyway,
Yes.
don't be nonchalant about the QA, because these are the people that are going to help you say, oh, hey, by the way, you really didn't do what you think you did. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is really dependent on who you're working with, kind of their preferences. It's like, I had one, I'm trying to think. There are so many ways that you can adjust what you deliver for the people you're delivering it to. So, one of the things my team asked early on was that I don't make guesses about what might be happening. And it's fun to do, but they were right. It's really kind of not my job at that point to tell them, oh, I think it's this. But it's sometimes, you have to have this kind of collaboration, because there was at one point where things happened, The start of it was sending an email. Sending an email wasn't the actual fault, but it did start the avalanche. So there's kind of a collaboration you have to get there, and it kind of goes both ways. But, yes.
Yeah. I have good news and I have bad news. The bad news is I have a myriad of questions. The good
Okay.
news is I'm only going to ask you one in public. No, but seriously, how important do you think ABE testing is for Angular developers?
So I've worked on an Angular web application for 2 years, and the unfortunate thing about Angular is that Selenium doesn't play well with it. So they have a specific kind of end-to-end testing framework called Protractor, and it's not great. That's the truth of it. I'm not sure if I have any.
Yeah, Protractor does suck.
Yeah, there's nobody using it. There's old, out-of-date documentation, and it's like, good luck if you want to, good luck to you.
And then I read the document instructions for Angular 1.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, my question was, how important is ABE testing for Angular?
The answer is very simple. You want to have end-to-end testing for whatever application you're doing, whether it's Angular,
Yeah.
React, PHP, protractors, whatever.
Yeah.
That's my opinion on that.
I agree with the opinion, but I also agree with Sarah's pragmatic answer of.
So
in this specific use case, the tools are like a jet engine, they suck and they blow.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why there's a east to west or west to east wind in Albuquerque or in New Mexico, because Arizona blows and Texas sucks. So, ta-da-ta. Anyway, Brian, you had a question?
What was it?
Oh, I don't recall that.
Yes.
Question.
That was it.
Getting feedback from the users, especially for testing, is always a challenge.
It is.
And one of the things that I've started exploring is trying to do recordings. So that as the user is going through and they find something broken, rather than trying to recreate it through screenshots or things like that, we actually start a session recording it, and then it comes back to you with basically DOM references and some
Yeah.
sort of script that will walk you through whatever the problem was. Have you seen anyone else doing that?
Well, from my own experience, I've kind of led user testing sessions where there's like a large room, and basically what I did was set up let people play with the application kind of like free form for a while, and I jotted down everything they were saying, like, ooh, the colors are pretty, and oh, what happened there? And one of the things that really shocked me was one of our users like magnified her screen like way bigger than I would have expected, and it just like the whole thing looked like garbage. And I was like, oh wow, I'm gonna have to get that fixed. So yeah, and after kind of absorbing all of that kind of feedback, doing structured testing, like leading them through, can you add someone to this program? Can you send an email? Kind of different things like that to see kind of how they take it. But recording it is a fantastic idea. And I did record it. I had put everyone in a room like this and started a Zoom session. So a lot of it was caught on the camera, kind of what people were talking about. And then I think the entire development team kind of like loitering around and like helping people if they got stuck with things. But it was a really cool experience, and it was pretty eye-opening to everybody how much we had kind of missed.
One of my first experiences with user testing was with AOL, and they actually would take a subset of people and put them in a room, and you could watch them literally do, and I say it was very, very enlightening as a developer, but very, very humbling as a developer. Because you assume people are going to click the start button in the lower right-hand corner, and they look at the instructions and they say, I don't know where the AOL is.
Yep.
And it's, there are multiple places where they could find it, and they just, I don't know, and they walk away.
And, and the others got disconnected.
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, but that's a different thing altogether.
And end-to-end testing, regression testing, none of those testings can ever get close to encompassing all of the bizarre ways people use their
But
applications.
blind user testing is definitely
Yeah.
beautiful and expensive. Because you gotta give these people like a movie pass or something.
Oh.
There is a service though, that we use currently called Full Story. It's available at fullstory.com. And it can do percentage-based sampling of user interactions with your application live. So you're not going to get like eye tracking or anything, but you can see every mouse interaction that they have. It's basically recording their screen transparently, securely. You can identify areas of privacy. So for example, if you go to our billing page, we flag the Domino's where you type your credit card in is not recorded. And we can see when we look at the report backs that they're not being recorded.
So I'm trying to have that kind of capability, though, as part of the development process for any app you make, because one of the things that we don't do a very good job of is getting automated feedback. We're dependent on the user actually sending an email
Yeah.
and saying, this is broken.
You should check out Full Story. It's interesting when you see a user get mad because then you can actually see like the cursor go like somebody shaking their mouse or like banging on the keyboard because it registers all those sorts of computer interactions. It's a cool tool. It's
Yeah.
fullstory.com.
This is kind of what I had mocked up. It's like, as on a small nonprofit software development team, I was like anything not software developer. I was like doing user feedback and business analysis and kind of like anything that would hold still long enough. So, I kind of had like a really general scripted exercise, things that I wanted people to talk about and to ask about, and some of these other kinds of questions. And then I said I jotted down just a ridiculous amount of feedback that this was just stuff I overheard. And it's like we kind of went over it as a team afterwards, like, okay, we're not planning on doing anything for this, or just different kinds of feedback. So that was a lot of stuff. Not a whole lot came of that, but it was a fun exercise.
All right, we are super over,
Oh, sorry.
but honestly, super interesting talk. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Sarah, for coming out. Sarah.